I'm Dave, and up until a few days ago, I thought I had a pretty good life. I'd been married to Sarah for 5 years, and for the most part, it felt like we had things figured out. You know, the usual routine, work, weekends, the occasional dinner out, nothing fancy, but comfortable, nothing that would raise alarms or make me question anything. It felt good. We had a rhythm, a sort of unspoken agreement on how things were supposed to go. I'm sure anyone who's been married for a few years can relate to that. It's not always fireworks, but it's steady. We had our fights like any couple, but nothing that really made me think there was something major wrong. We were just two people trying to make it work, with a few bumps along the way. We both knew the drill. We'd have a good laugh about things, work through the little issues, and go about our lives. Nothing that screamed trouble. I remember when we first got together, how everything seemed so perfect. Sarah was always there, smiling, laughing, and making me feel like I was the center of her world. Those early days of dating were filled with excitement. We would talk for hours, and I remember thinking, this is it. She's the one. I'm lucky. And I meant it. I never once doubted it. Even when we decided to get married, it felt like the natural next step. I was ready to start a family, build a future, and enjoy the comfort that comes with being with someone who understands you. That's why our anniversary meant so much to me. I wanted it to be special, something to remind us of how far we'd come. I was looking forward to it more than I had in a long time. It wasn't just another day on the calendar, it was a symbol of everything we had built together. I had big plans for us, something intimate, something memorable, just for the two of us. A nice dinner, maybe a weekend getaway. I wanted to make sure she knew how much she meant to me. I'd been working a lot lately, so I thought this would be the perfect chance to reconnect, to remind her of why we were together in the first place. But what happened wasn't anything close to what I had imagined. The night before our anniversary, Sarah came home, and it was like something was different. She was off. I could tell immediately. She didn't seem excited about the anniversary, didn't react the way she usually would when I mentioned our plans. Instead, she was distracted, distant, almost cold. At first, I thought maybe she had a long day, and maybe that was the reason she wasn't in the best mood. But something about it didn't sit right with me. I asked her if everything was okay, and she just brushed it off, saying she was tired. That was nothing new, but still there was a strange energy in the air. I thought, maybe I'm just overthinking it. So I let it go. I didn't push it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We had been through ups and downs, sure, but our anniversary was supposed to be something different. It was supposed to remind us of the love we'd shared, of the years we'd spent together. I wanted to feel that excitement again, that sense of joy that came with being with the person you chose to spend your life with. I didn't expect anything to go wrong. I guess I took it for granted that everything was fine. I didn't know that the next morning, when I woke up ready to celebrate, Sarah would drop the kind of bombshell that would change everything. The day before our anniversary began just like any other. I woke up early, made coffee, and started getting ready for work. I could tell Sarah had been up before me, but she wasn't her usual self. There was a quietness about her that morning, something that didn't quite fit with how she normally started the day. She was there, but it felt like she was somewhere else. Her words were clipped, her responses short. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe it was just a little stress, maybe she had a rough night. But as the day went on, something inside me couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We'd been together long enough to know each other's rhythms, and lately hers had been off. For the past few weeks, there'd been an increasing distance between us. At first, I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that maybe she was just tired, overwhelmed with work, or maybe she just needed some space. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it had been happening more frequently. Sarah, the woman who used to share everything with me, had become distant, almost unresponsive. I'd try to talk to her about our day, about the little things, and she'd give me one-word answers, almost like she wasn't really there. It wasn't just the lack of conversation, it was the small things that added up. The affectionate touches that used to come so easily between us were few and far between. Whenever I'd try to get close to her, she'd pull away, not in an obvious way, but enough to leave me feeling rejected. I'd try to make small gestures, asking her how her day went making dinner for us and even planning a little surprise for our anniversary. But there was always an excuse. I'm tired. I've got a headache. I've been working too much. The excuses became so frequent. I almost started to feel like I was the problem, like maybe I wasn't doing enough, or maybe she was just tired of me. It left me confused. I tried to talk about it, but she always brushed it off, acting like I was overthinking things. I told myself I just needed to be patient, that maybe things would get back to normal. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I couldn't pinpoint what, but there was a shift that I couldn't ignore anymore. And on the eve of our anniversary, it felt like that shift became undeniable. That evening, Sarah came home from work and said she needed to talk. She didn't sound like her usual self, her voice was more flat, more distant. As we sat down in the living room, she dropped the bombshell. She said she was going on a vacation with her ex. Just like that. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I could feel the blood rush to my face as I tried to process what she had just said. A vacation with her ex on our anniversary? It felt like everything I had been sensing, her distance, her withdrawal, the lack of intimacy, had just come crashing down in one conversation. I didn't react at first. I wanted to understand, to get some clarity. I asked her why, how, what this meant for us, but her responses were cold, almost robotic. She said it was no big deal, that it wasn't anything serious, just some time for old friends to reconnect. It felt like she was trying to downplay it, to make it sound like it was no big deal. But the way she said it, the way she was so firm about it, made it clear that this wasn't just a casual thing. And her timing, the fact that it was happening on our anniversary, made it feel like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe it. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it. I had planned something special for us. I had been looking forward to this day, wanting to remind her how much I loved her, how much she meant to me. But instead she was going on a vacation with the very man she had once shared a life with. I couldn't understand it. It wasn't just the fact that she was going with him. It was the complete disregard for what this day meant to me, to us. She said it was a last-minute trip, that it was something they had planned ages ago. But it felt rehearsed, like she had already made up her mind and didn't care about how I would feel. I tried to hide the hurt, but it was there, gnawing at me. I didn't want to seem weak or desperate, but I was crushed. This wasn't just a simple change of plans. It felt like she was choosing him over me, over our life together. The night ended with her going to pack for her trip, and I sat there frozen, trying to make sense of everything. There was no anger, no shouting, just a cold, painful silence. In that moment, I realized I couldn't keep ignoring what had been happening. Something had changed in our relationship, and I was finally seeing it for what it was. I was caught completely off guard when Sarah told me she was going to vacation with her ex. It wasn't just the fact that she was going on a trip with someone from her past, but it was the timing. Our anniversary was just around the corner, and here she was, casually dropping this bombshell on me. My mind was racing as I tried to process her words. I tried to act calm, to keep my voice steady, but inside I was a mess. How could she be so casual about it? How could she just brush off something so important to me? She said it wasn't a big deal, that they had been friends for years, and it was just a chance to catch up, that she hadn't seen him in ages, and this was just something that needed to happen. The more she spoke, the more I felt like I was being gaslighted. She wasn't just downplaying the situation, she was making me feel like I was overreacting. I wanted to scream, to ask her how she could think this was okay, but instead I just sat there. She kept going on about how it was no big deal, how everything was just fine, and how I shouldn't worry. The more she explained it away, the more I felt like I was losing control of the situation, like she was trying to convince me that I was the one who was crazy for even questioning it. But the truth was, the moment she said it, I felt this cold knot in my stomach. My mind was running through 100 scenarios, none of them good. I thought back to the times when she'd been distant, when she'd been colder than usual. I tried to make excuses for her, telling myself that it was just stress or something else, but deep down I knew there was something more to it. How could she not see how wrong this was? How could she not understand that what she was doing was a betrayal? It wasn't just the trip with her ex, it was the complete disregard for our anniversary, for what that day meant to us. She kept insisting that it wasn't anything serious. Just a couple of old friends reconnecting. And I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the way she said it, the way she was so nonchalant about it, made me feel like she wasn't being honest. She didn't seem at all concerned about how I might feel, how hurt I might be. She acted like it was perfectly normal, like there was no reason for me to feel upset or betrayed. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a mistake or an oversight. This was intentional. The more she spoke, the more I began to feel the weight of the betrayal. It wasn't just the fact that she was going on a trip with her ex, it was the timing, the fact that she didn't care enough to make this special for us, that she didn't see how wrong it was to spend our anniversary with someone else. I tried to push the anger down, to keep it under control, but it was hard. I wanted to shout, to tell her how hurt I was, how much this felt like a slap in the face. But I didn't. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I just nodded, pretending like I was fine, pretending that it didn't hurt. I kept asking myself how this could be happening. How could she just dismiss what was supposed to be a special day for us? I tried to be rational, to tell myself that maybe I was overreacting, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't something I could just ignore. She was going to vacation with her ex on our anniversary, and it felt like everything that had been good in our relationship was slipping through my fingers. And yet, in that moment, I decided not to argue with her. There was a part of me that knew it wasn't worth it, at least not yet. But the seed of doubt, of betrayal, had been planted, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. When Sarah left for her trip with her ex, the weight of the situation began to sink in. The anniversary, which had once seemed so important, now felt completely hollow. I tried to busy myself with things around the house, but every corner, every empty room, just reminded me of how alone I felt. I sat there in the silence, unable to shake the feeling that everything was falling apart. The house was quiet, the anniversary plans I had made now meaningless, and it felt like Sarah's absence was more than just physical. It was emotional too. It was as if the space between us had grown too wide to bridge. I started going over everything in my mind. The past few months, the subtle shifts in her behavior that I had ignored or dismissed, the late nights, the sudden secretive phone calls, the way she would get defensive when I asked simple questions. At the time, I convinced myself it was nothing, just work stress maybe. But now, sitting there alone, I couldn't ignore it anymore. There had been warning signs, things that I brushed aside, hoping they were nothing more than coincidence, but now it all made sense. The distance, the coldness, the excuses, the way she avoided being close to me emotionally and physically, but then suddenly seemed so eager to reconnect with her ex. It wasn't just a random trip, it was a statement, one that I couldn't ignore. I kept asking myself how I had been so blind. How had I not seen this coming? All the times she had pulled away, all the moments where I tried to reach out, but she kept her distance. Why hadn't I questioned it sooner? Was I so desperate to believe everything was okay that I ignored the obvious signs? It wasn't just the fact that she was going on a trip with her ex, it was the entire shift in our relationship that had been happening for months. It was the emotional distance, the lack of connection, and her blatant disregard for what our anniversary meant to me. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I had been trying so hard to be understanding, trying to be patient with her, but she had crossed a line that I couldn't ignore. I couldn't keep letting things slide, telling myself it was just a phase or that she'd snap out of it. I knew I had to do something. I had to stop being passive and start taking control of the situation. I had been holding on to the hope that things would get better, but that hope was gone now. There was no going back. The trust had been broken, and I was no longer going to sit around waiting for her to fix it. It was clear she wasn't going to change, at least not for me. It was time to protect myself. The first step was to start researching divorce options. I had never thought about this before. Divorce was something that seemed so distant, so foreign, but now it was my reality. I looked into the legal process, trying to understand what would be involved, how things would be split. I felt numb as I went through the steps, each piece of information feeling more like a confirmation that I was doing the right thing. There was no other choice. I couldn't live like this anymore, constantly questioning whether she was being honest with me, wondering if she was seeing someone else. I had to take action. The next thing I decided was to change the locks on the house. It was symbolic, yes, but it was also practical. I couldn't let her just waltz back in as if nothing had happened. If she was going to choose to be with someone else, then she needed to understand the consequences. I wasn't going to be her fallback option, someone she could take for granted when things didn't work out with him. I wasn't going to be that person anymore. Changing the locks felt like a small step, but it was also a huge one for me. It was a way of saying that I wasn't going to allow her to keep coming and going as she pleased, without any regard for my feelings or our marriage. I didn't want to be cruel, but I was done with being passive. I had given her everything I had, and it wasn't enough. Now I was taking control. I had to do it for my own sanity. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, wondering what she was really up to, wondering if I was the last person she cared about. I had to protect myself, even if it meant making the hardest decision of my life. Changing the locks was the first real step in that process. It was time to stop hoping things would magically improve and start taking steps to move on, no matter how painful it would be. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least it would be mine, and that was the first step toward reclaiming my life. Changing the locks was something I never thought I would have to do. When I walked into the house that evening, alone again, it felt like everything had changed. The silence of the house felt almost deafening. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. It was supposed to be us, together, making memories. But now it was just me, and in that moment I knew I had to take control. The first step was simple: changing the locks. As I stood there looking at the door, I felt a sense of finality. It wasn't just about locking her out of the house. It was about locking her out of my life. It was about reclaiming some control over a situation that had spun out of my hands. Sarah's actions had taken away so much of my peace, and I had let it go on for too long. I thought I was doing the right thing by being patient, by trying to hold on to something that no longer existed. But that ended the moment she walked out the door with her ex. That's when I realized I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I had been in denial, but the betrayal was too clear now. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed through the empty hallway. I felt a mix of anger and sadness rise within me. This wasn't the man I had become, but it was the man I had to be now. The one who took responsibility for his life and his future. The man who wasn't going to let anyone walk all over him anymore. I thought about how long I had been putting up with Sarah's excuses, the endless late nights, the coldness between us, the growing distance that had nothing to do with work or stress, but everything to do with her lack of interest in our marriage. Every time I tried to make things better, she pulled further away. The signs were always there, but I kept excusing them. I kept telling myself that things would get better. I kept waiting for her to come back to me. But now, standing there in the silence, I realized that I had been living a lie. I had ignored everything that had been wrong, all in the name of saving a marriage that Sarah had already given up on. The lock on the door wasn't just physical, it symbolized the emotional barrier I had to put in place to protect myself from further hurt. I wasn't just locking her out of the house, I was locking her out of my heart. I couldn't keep being her backup. I couldn't keep waiting for her to decide if she was going to choose me. As I went from door to door, replacing the locks, I couldn't help but think about everything that had led me here. The memories of when things were good came flooding back. When we laughed together, when we dreamed together, when we were a team. There were times when I thought this was all just a phase, when I thought we'd work through the rough patches like we always had before. But as I stood there turning the final lock, I knew in my heart that things would never go back to the way they were. No amount of fixing, no amount of hope would undo the hurt that had been done. It was in that moment that I realized the next step. Divorce wasn't just an option. It was the only way forward. There was no coming back from this. As much as I had tried to convince myself that we could find our way back, the reality was undeniable. Sarah had already made her choice. She had already turned her back on me, and I had to do the same. The thought of divorce was terrifying, but it also felt like the only way I could move forward. It was the only way to stop being trapped in a cycle of pain and disappointment. I had spent years trying to hold things together, trying to make excuses for her behavior, trying to believe that things could improve. But now I saw the truth clearly. There was no fixing this. No matter how much I wanted to believe in us, there was no going back to what we had. And that was the hardest pill to swallow. So I stood there, locking the door, and finally accepting the fact that I had to let go. It was time to start over, time to move forward with my life without her, time to take control of my own future, to stop waiting for someone who would never choose me. The decision wasn't easy, and the pain didn't just disappear, but I knew it was the only way I could truly move on. The moment I turned that last key in the lock was the moment I started the rest of my life. The decision to file for divorce was one I never thought I would have to make. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life, watching the events unfold around me. But when I knew there was no way to fix what had been broken, I made the call to meet with a divorce lawyer. Walking into that office was a huge step, one that solidified the reality of what I had to do. The idea of explaining my personal pain to a stranger was uncomfortable, but I knew it was necessary. This was no longer about saving a relationship. It was about protecting myself and moving forward. The lawyer's office felt cold and clinical, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil I was experiencing. I had never imagined I would be here, sitting across from someone who was about to guide me through the process of ending my marriage. I explained everything that had happened, the betrayal, the lies, the emotional distance. I felt a lump form in my throat as I talked about Sarah and the pain she had caused. But I couldn't afford to let that pain control me anymore. I needed to make decisions, and I needed to do it calmly. The lawyer listened patiently, taking notes and asking the right questions. She didn't offer sympathy. She wasn't there to feel sorry for me. Instead, she gave me advice, practical guidance on how to navigate the divorce process. We discussed the paperwork that would need to be filed, the timeline for everything, and the steps involved in splitting our lives apart. It was strange. It felt like I was talking about someone else's life, someone who wasn't emotionally invested in what had happened. It was all about facts, numbers, and legalities. No one in that room cared about the years I had spent with Sarah, the late-night conversations, the shared dreams. All that mattered now was what we owned, how we would divide it, and what we could both walk away with. She explained that in many cases, divorces were a simple matter of splitting things 50-50. But because of the circumstances of mine, with Sarah's affair and betrayal, I might have grounds for a more favorable settlement. The emotional side of me wanted to fight for everything, to make Sarah pay for the pain she had caused. But the lawyer was clear. The focus needed to be on what was fair, not on revenge. It was about protecting my future, not trying to hurt Sarah the way she had hurt me. As we discussed the assets, our house, bank accounts, savings, it was hard to believe that we had once been so intertwined, so deeply connected in our finances and future plans. Now, everything had to be carefully divided. The realization hit me like a punch in the gut. Everything we had built together was now up for grabs, and nothing felt stable anymore. Even the simplest details felt overwhelming. How to divide the furniture, the cars, our personal belongings. It seemed trivial at first, but the emotional weight of it all became more and more apparent with each question the lawyer asked. I had to change my mindset. This wasn't about emotions anymore. It was a business transaction. I couldn't afford to keep thinking about the love we had once shared. The love was gone, replaced by betrayal and distrust. I had to treat this process like a business deal, something that needed to be handled with precision and efficiency. It wasn't easy, and it didn't feel natural. Every part of me wanted to scream, to throw everything I had at Sarah and demand retribution. But that wasn't going to help me in the long run. The emotional strain of the process was like a slow burn. It wore me down little by little, each step taking something from me. Filing for divorce wasn't just about paperwork or legalities. It was the final acknowledgement that everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, had been a lie. The pain wasn't just in the betrayal, it was in the realization that this was the end. There was no going back, no undoing the hurt, and no fixing what was broken. The finality of it was suffocating. As we wrapped up the initial meeting, I walked out of the office feeling drained, exhausted, and strangely detached from the person I had been when I walked in. The process had shifted my focus from emotional pain to legal action. It felt like I was being forced to compartmentalize my life, to separate the person I was from the decisions I needed to make. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I had to keep moving forward, even when it felt like my whole world was falling apart. Filing for divorce felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders, and at the same time, a new weight settling in its place. It wasn't something I took lightly, and as I walked out of the lawyer's office after submitting the paperwork, a part of me felt like I had made a clean break from all the pain and lies. But there was also a lingering feeling of loss. Despite everything that had happened, there were still moments when I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. Could there have been another way? Maybe I could have tried harder to fix things, but deep down, I knew this was the only choice left. The love that had once been there had faded, replaced by distrust and betrayal. When Sarah found out, it wasn't a surprise to her. I could tell by the way she reacted, almost like she expected it. She didn't seem shocked or devastated. Instead, she seemed more upset that I had taken that step without consulting her, as though her feelings about the situation didn't matter. She immediately tried to talk me out of it, claiming she made a mistake, that she didn't mean for things to get this far. She begged me for another chance, saying she was sorry, that she could change. But I wasn't buying it. The words were empty to me. How could I believe anything she said after everything that had happened? The trust that had been broken wasn't something that could be fixed with a few apologies. She wasn't just asking for a second chance. She was asking me to disregard everything I had felt and experienced in the past few months. She wanted me to act like none of it had happened. I listened to her plead, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the memory of the night she told me she was vacationing with her ex. The way she downplayed the situation like it was just a casual thing made me realize how little regard she had for me. She didn't even understand how serious her actions were. I had been in a fog for weeks, trying to make sense of her coldness, trying to convince myself that everything would be fine, that we could work through it. But when she told me about the trip, it was like everything clicked. All the signs were there. She had been checked out for months, but I kept excusing her behavior, thinking it was just stress or something temporary. As Sarah begged for another chance, I reflected on everything she had said to me before she left. How many times had I tried to reach out, only to be met with excuses? How many times had I tried to talk to her, to connect with her, only to be pushed away? All of it made sense now. She wasn't interested in saving our relationship. She wasn't willing to put in the work, and she had already made her choice. It hurt, but I knew in that moment that there was nothing more I could do. The damage was done. She had made it clear with her actions that she didn't care about me in the way I had cared about her. I thought about the good times we had, the moments when we laughed together, the plans we made for the future, but those moments felt like they belonged to a different life, one that no longer existed. I wasn't the same person anymore, and neither was she. It wasn't just about the affair or the trip with her ex. It was about how I had been treated, how she had checked out long before she ever told me the truth. And in the end, I realized that this was the only way forward. There was no going back to what we had. As I sat there listening to her, it was clear to me that I had already made the right choice. She was asking for another chance, but I had already given her everything I had. She had taken it for granted. There was nothing left to save. The marriage was over, and filing for divorce was my way of taking control of my life again, of moving forward and leaving the past behind. It wasn't going to be easy, and the pain would linger, but I knew that the only way to heal was to let go and start over. And that was what I was doing, starting a new chapter, one where I wasn't bound to the person who had hurt me the most. When Sarah returned from her trip, the tension was palpable. It had been days since she left, and I had spent that time thinking, processing, and coming to terms with everything. The moment she stepped through the door, it was as if nothing had changed. She acted as if everything was normal, like she was just coming home from a regular vacation. The sense of entitlement in her demeanor was infuriating. She didn't even seem to acknowledge what had transpired, or the fact that I was still dealing with the aftermath of her betrayal. She started talking to me as though nothing had happened, trying to engage in small talk. It was almost as if she expected me to just pick up where we had left off, as if her actions hadn't shattered everything between us. I didn't respond at first, and when I did, it wasn't with the calmness I had hoped for. I was done pretending that everything was fine. She kept talking, explaining the trip, how it had been nothing, and how I shouldn't be upset. She tried to downplay the whole situation, as if it was a trivial matter, but the reality was much darker, and I wasn't going to let her gloss over it. It became clear that she didn't understand the depth of what she had done. She was still trying to justify her actions, still making excuses. And when I pointed out that she had chosen to spend our anniversary with her ex, she became defensive. "You were never around," she said. "You never paid attention to me. I had to do something for myself." Her words hit me like a punch, but instead of reacting with anger or frustration, I responded calmly, even though it felt like my insides were burning. I told her that this wasn't about me not paying attention. This was about betrayal. This was about choosing someone else over me, over our marriage. I reminded her that this wasn't the first time she had been distant, that this wasn't a one-time mistake, but a pattern of behavior. The more I spoke, the more defensive she became, and the more I realized how little she had grasped the situation. She tried to flip the blame back onto me, suggesting that if I had been more attentive, none of this would have happened. It was classic manipulation, a tactic I had seen before, but hadn't fully recognized until now. The conversation quickly escalated into an argument. She began raising her voice, but I stayed firm, keeping my tone controlled no matter how much she tried to provoke me. I could feel her desperation, her attempts to manipulate the situation, but there was no going back for me. She had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to pretend anymore that everything was okay. I wasn't angry in the way I thought I would be, but I felt a deep sadness and relief all at once. Sadness for the end of what we once had, but relief because I finally knew where I stood. The emotional closure hit me in that moment. I had expected to feel a rush of anger or bitterness, but instead I just felt an overwhelming sense of calm. I had moved on. Despite all the hurt and betrayal, I had already let go of the idea of salvaging this relationship. The anger I had once felt was now replaced with clarity. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me any longer. I wasn't going to sit here and let her convince me that everything could be fixed with a few words. I looked at her calmly and told her that it was over. The marriage was done. There was nothing left to fix, no reason to try anymore. Her eyes widened in disbelief, as if she had expected me to fight for her, to beg for her to stay. But that wasn't going to happen. I told her she needed to pack her things and leave. I had already made up my mind, and I wasn't going to let her drag me back into the emotional chaos she had caused. Her face shifted between anger, guilt, and disbelief, but there was no longer any room for negotiation. I had made my decision. I had already closed the door to that chapter of my life, and I wasn't opening it again. The calmness I felt was not something I had expected. I thought I would struggle, question my decision, or wonder if I had done the right thing. But as I stood there, watching her try to gather her thoughts, I realized that I had already emotionally moved on. I was done. And that realization was the final step toward reclaiming my life. After Sarah left, the emptiness of the house became overwhelming. It wasn't just the quiet, but the weight of what had happened. I found myself waking up each day feeling like I was stepping into a new life, one I didn't quite recognize yet. There was no longer a routine that involved her, no dinners together, no casual talks about our day. At first, it was just silence, and that silence was suffocating. I felt it deeply. It was as if a part of me was missing, and I couldn't tell if it was the life I had built with her or just the void of something familiar being gone. The initial days after she left were hard. I was angry, frustrated, confused, and hurt. There was a deep, gut-wrenching ache that I couldn't explain. I was angry at Sarah for what she had done, for choosing someone else over me, for not even trying to salvage what we had. It didn't make sense. How could she just walk away from everything? I was angry at myself too, for not seeing it sooner, for allowing things to spiral this far. I had put so much of myself into trying to make things work, only to find out that she had already checked out. Then came the sadness. It wasn't just sadness about losing her, it was sadness about losing the future I had imagined. There were things I had planned, moments I had expected to share with her that were now never going to happen. The thought of those things was crushing, and I spent a lot of time in the early days just grieving the end of what I thought we had. But the sadness eventually gave way to something else. Relief. Relief that the constant worry, perfect partner, I reconnected with old friends, and they helped remind me who I was before all of this. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of what had been. I had to build something new. The lessons I learned through this process were invaluable, and they're ones I'll carry with me moving forward. Trust, respect, and loyalty, those were the things that I had taken for granted before. I had always believed that love was enough to hold a relationship together, but now I understood that those things weren't just nice to have. They were the foundation of any meaningful connection. Without trust, without respect, without loyalty, everything else falls apart. I had learned the hard way, but that didn't mean the lesson was lost on me. It was a painful reminder, but a valuable one. Looking ahead, I could see a future that wasn't weighed down by betrayal. The road ahead was still uncertain, and I knew there would be challenges, but I was no longer afraid of what might come. I had faced one of the hardest things a person can face, the end of a marriage, the end of a dream for the future, and I had survived it. That gave me strength. The future wasn't about holding on to the past anymore. It was about creating something new. I knew that I could trust myself to make better choices, to surround myself with people who valued me for who I was, and to focus on what truly mattered to me. In the end, the journey wasn't just about healing from a broken relationship. It was about finding myself again. It was about reclaiming my sense of worth and my belief in my ability to create a future I could be proud of. I had been through the fire, and though I wasn't unscathed, I was stronger for it. I learned that sometimes the end of something painful is just the beginning of something better. I was ready for that new beginning. The past no longer had a hold on me, and with that, I could finally move forward. The next chapter was mine to write.